Her own father sold her like a piece of merchandise to a wild Apache warrior in order to save his land. But when that man touched her for the first time, what happened next horrified her family and shocked two entire worlds. The scorching August sun beat down mercilessly on the San Cristobal ranch the day Carmela turned 18. But instead of celebration, the day brought the announcement that would change her destiny forever. Don Bautista Herrera, a 55-year-old man whose weathered face spoke of decades spent battling the Apaches who relentlessly attacked his lands, had made the most difficult decision of his life. The ranch sprawled across thousands of acres in the Sonoran territory of Mexico in the year 1876. It was one of the most prosperous estates in the region, with cattle grazing golden meadows and crops that fed 3 nearby villages. But prosperity came at a cost. Constant raids from Apache warriors who claimed the land as theirs since time immemorial. Carmela was Don Bautista's only daughter, born after 4 sons who had already proven their worth defending the family estate. But she, with chestnut hair that gleamed like honey under the sun and eyes green as emeralds, had grown up protected within the adobe walls of the main house, unaware of the brutal realities her brothers faced daily in the fields. A beautiful girl, but useless in the times we live in, Don Bautista had muttered that morning, watching his daughter feed the doves in the central courtyard from the window of his study. His words were harsh, but his heart broke as he said them. Carmela had grown up sweet and obedient, with a smile that could brighten even the darkest days. But in a world where survival depended on strength and cunning, her gentleness seemed more a weakness than a virtue. That same afternoon, Colonel Mendoza arrived with a proposal that sounded more like an ultimatum than a negotiation. Apache attacks had intensified in recent months, and the Mexican army could no longer guarantee protection for all the ranches in the region. However, there was a chance for a temporary truce, a deal that could save lives on both sides. "Don Bautista," the colonel had said while pouring himself a glass of mezcal in the study where destinies were decided. "We have a special Apache prisoner. He is no ordinary warrior. This one is the nephew of Chief Mangas, one of the most respected leaders of their people. We captured him wounded after the last raid, but instead of executing him, we want to use him to negotiate." The plan was simple in its cruelty: to offer Carmela to the Apache warrior as a gesture of respect and trust, sealing an alliance that would protect the region from future attacks. It was an ancient practice used by many cultures to unite enemy territories through forced marriage. But for Don Bautista, it meant giving his only daughter to a world he considered savage and dangerous. "My daughter is not a commodity to be traded," he had roared at first, his fist slamming against the solid oak table that had belonged to his grandfather. But Colonel Mendoza knew the weaknesses of desperate men. "Your other 4 sons are of marrying age and ready to start their own families," he continued with cold calculation. "If the attacks continue, there will be no ranch left to inherit and no sons alive to carry the Herrera name. One sacrificed daughter may save an entire generation." Those words struck deep into the rancher's heart. For the next few hours, Don Bautista paced his study like a caged animal, torn between paternal love and the duty to protect his entire family. He had seen too many ranches reduced to ash, too many families shattered by a war with no end in sight. When he finally called Carmela into his presence, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues that seemed to foreshadow the drama to come. The young woman entered the room with the natural grace she had inherited from her mother, Doña Amparo, unaware that her world was about to shatter. "My daughter," Don Bautista began, avoiding her eyes, "I've made a decision that will save this family and everyone who depends on us. Tomorrow, you will leave for Apache territory, where you will live as the wife of one of their warriors." The words fell upon Carmela like a bolt of lightning splitting a tree during a storm. For several seconds, she thought she must have misheard. Her mind couldn't grasp the magnitude of what her father had just declared. "Father?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he replied. And for the first time in her life, Carmela saw tears forming in the eyes of the man she had always believed stronger than the mountains that surrounded their home. "It's the only way to protect everything we've built. Your sacrifice will save the lives of your brothers, your mother, and all the workers on this ranch." The word sacrifice echoed through Carmela's soul like a funeral bell. In that moment, she realized that to her family, she had never truly been a beloved daughter, only a pawn in the great game of survival on the frontier. "Is this the woman they're sending me?" Takakota asked in Spanish, his accent thick but clear, directing the question to the colonel. His voice held a note of disbelief that made Carmela's cheeks burn with humiliation. "You think I'll accept someone thrown at me like an animal given scraps?" he added bitterly. The colonel's jaw tightened. "You have no choice, Apache. This woman is part of the agreement. You will treat her with respect, or you'll be facing the firing squad again." For the first time since arriving, Carmela found her voice. "I didn't ask to be here either," she said, her tone steady with a dignity that startled everyone, including herself. "But here we are, both of us, so we'll have to find a way to survive this." Her words were direct, without self-pity. Takakota studied her with new eyes. In her emerald gaze, he saw something unexpected, not a weeping victim, nor a woman broken by circumstance, but someone who, despite her evident fear, held her head high and faced her fate with courage. After Takota's bindings were removed and they were left alone in the tent, they stared at each other for long minutes in silence. Two strangers, tied together by circumstances neither had chosen. Two prisoners of decisions made by others. And yet, within that silence, the faint spark of a different story, a story neither could have foreseen, began to stir. The journey to Apache territory lasted 3 days, though to Carmela it felt like an eternity. She rode silently on a mare assigned to her, while Takakota travelled beside her on a paint horse that seemed to move as one with him. He hadn't spoken a word to her since the camp, but she could feel his gaze from time to time, studying her, measuring her reactions to the increasingly wild and unforgiving terrain. The Apache territory was unlike anything she had ever known. Towering red mountains stretched skyward like sleeping giants, while the valleys were dotted with cactus and scrub whispering ancestral secrets with each gust of wind. It was a land that breathed freedom and resistance, where every rock told the stories of warriors who had fought for generations to preserve their way of life. When they finally arrived at the Apache village, Carmela felt as though she had entered an entirely different world. The tanned hide tents were arranged in a perfect circle around a central fire that seemed to burn eternally. Bronze-skinned children ran between the shelters, pausing to gawk curiously at the pale-skinned woman who had arrived with one of their warriors. "This will be your home," Takakota said at last, gesturing to a smaller tent located at the outskirts of the circle. His first words in 3 days came out rough, as if speaking physically pained him. "You'll sleep there. I'll sleep outside until we figure out what to do with you." His words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. It was as though Takakota were laying down the rules for a coexistence neither of them had asked for. Carmela nodded in silence, understanding that she would have to prove her worth before earning any kind of respect here. The tent was simple but functional, a bed made from buffalo hides, a few clay vessels for water, and a small area where she could store her meager belongings. It was more Spartan than the humblest room on the ranch, but there was something about its simplicity that calmed her. There were no luxuries to maintain, no appearances to uphold, only the basic need to survive, one day at a time. The first few days were the hardest of her life. The Apache women watched Carmela with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She had come from the world of their enemies, the people who had killed their brothers and sons in countless battles. How could they trust someone whose father had likely fired shots at Apache warriors? Aisha, a middle-aged woman with scarred hands that spoke of a life of hard labor, was the first to approach. "Do you know how to do anything useful?" she asked bluntly in broken Spanish. "Or are you only good at sitting like the ranch women?" Carmela had grown up protected, but not useless. Her mother had taught her to sew, cook, and care for the wounded when necessary. "I can work with my hands," she replied honestly, "but I'll need to be taught how to do it your way." That simple response shifted something in Aisha's expression. There was no arrogance in Carmela's words, no air of superiority, just the honesty of someone willing to learn. Over the following weeks, Carmela immersed herself in learning a completely different way of life. She learned how to tan hides under the guidance of women who had perfected the craft over decades. Her hands, once soft as petals, grew rough with calluses and small cuts. But each mark was proof that she was adapting to her new reality. She learned to identify edible desert plants, to find water in places that seemed impossibly dry, to prepare meals using ingredients she'd never seen before. Each day was a lesson in survival, but also a lesson in reverence for a culture that had learned to live in harmony with the harshest land. Takakota watched her from a distance, still keeping his word to sleep outside the tent. Some nights, Carmela heard him stirring near the fire he built to guard the entrance, and she wondered what thoughts occupied the mind of a man who had lost his freedom at the same moment she had lost hers. One afternoon, while Carmela was helping to repair a tent damaged by the wind, alarming news swept through the village. A group of children had gone out to gather wild fruit and had not returned by nightfall. In Apache territory, night brought dangers that could easily cost lives: wild animals, treacherous terrain, or worse, patrolling Mexican soldiers. "We'll form search parties," announced Nalnish, the acting village chief in the absence of Mangus. "Takakota, you know the Northern Canyon trails better than anyone." Carmela saw the tension on Takota's face. This was his first chance to prove his loyalty to the village after his capture, but also a chance to escape if he chose not to return. All eyes turned to him, waiting to see whether he would choose honor or personal freedom. "I'll go," Takakota declared without hesitation. "But she comes with me," he added, pointing to Carmela. His statement shocked everyone, especially her. "The white woman?" Nalnish asked with open skepticism. "She has small hands. She can reach places we can't," Takakota explained. "If the children are hurt or trapped, she could be useful." It was the first time Takakota had spoken of her as anything other than a burden, and Carmela felt a strange mixture of pride and nervousness. She knew this was her chance to prove she could be more than just a tolerated outsider in the village. The search led them through rocky trails that twisted between towering red cliffs, natural cathedrals rising toward the star-studded sky. Takakota moved with the silent grace of someone born to live in rhythm with the earth, while Carmela struggled to keep pace without making a sound that might alert any lurking danger. "Why did you really bring me?" she finally asked when they paused to drink from a hidden spring nestled among the rocks. Takakota studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because you needed to prove your worth just as much as I needed to prove mine," he said with blunt honesty. "If we return without the children, we'll both be seen as failures. If we find them, we both earn our place." His words revealed a deep understanding of the social dynamic they faced. They weren't just a captured warrior and a traded woman. They were two outsiders who needed to show they deserved to belong to this community. It was Carmela who heard the faint crying first, a soft, distant whimper echoing from deep within a canyon wall. Her ears, trained to pick up the subtle sounds of domestic life, caught what Takakota had missed. "There," she whispered, pointing toward a crevice that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Takakota peered into the crack and confirmed her suspicion. 3 children were trapped inside a natural cavity, frightened but seemingly unharmed. The problem was the opening. It was far too narrow for a grown warrior to descend without getting stuck. "Can I go down?" Carmela offered without hesitation, sizing up the gap with the eyes of someone who had recently learned to measure and maneuver in tight spaces. "It's dangerous," Takakota muttered, but she was already examining how best to lower herself. "Everything in life is dangerous," she replied with a wry smile that surprised him. "At least this time, I get to choose my own risk." With a rope made of plant fibers tied around her waist, Carmela slowly descended into the dark cavity where the terrified children waited. Her heart pounded, but not from fear. For the first time since arriving in Apache territory, she felt truly useful. The children clung to her as if she were an angel sent to save them. One by one, she secured them with the rope so Takakota could pull them up to safety. When she herself was finally lifted from the crevice, she found the warrior watching her with an expression she had never seen in his eyes before. "You have the heart of a warrior," he murmured, helping her to her feet. It was the first compliment she had received since her arrival, and it lit something deep within her. It wasn't just gratitude or relief, it was the recognition of a part of herself she had never known existed. Their return to the village was triumphant. The parents of the rescued children welcomed Carmela not as a stranger, but as someone who had risked her own safety for the well-being of their sons and daughters. The women who once eyed her with suspicion now looked at her with genuine respect. That night, for the first time since she arrived, Takakota approached the fire where Carmela sat alone after the celebration. "May I sit with you?" he asked, an unexpected courtesy. "It's your village," she replied. "I'm just the unwanted guest." "Not anymore," he said, settling beside her at a respectful distance, close enough for them to speak quietly. "Today, you showed that your presence here can be a blessing, not a curse." For the first time since they met, they truly spoke. Takakota told her about his capture, how he had fought until he lost consciousness while defending a group of elders during a raid by the Mexican army. Carmela shared stories of her life on the ranch, how she had always felt useful only in domestic tasks, never imagining she possessed the inner strength to face real challenges. "Do you miss your old life?" he asked, once the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Carmela took her time answering. "I miss the safety," she admitted. "I miss knowing what to expect each day, but I don't miss feeling useless. Here, every day I survive is a victory I earn." Takakota nodded in understanding. "I miss the freedom to ride without limits, but I don't miss the loneliness of not truly belonging anywhere." His words revealed a vulnerability Carmela hadn't expected. This warrior, who seemed so strong and self-reliant, was also a man searching for his place in the world. When they parted that night, both knew something had changed between them. They were no longer just two prisoners tolerating each other. They had begun to see each other as complete human beings, with histories, fears, and strengths that deserved respect. The days following the rescue transformed Carmela's life in the Apache village. The women who had once eyed her with suspicion now sought her help with tasks that required delicate hands or a different perspective. Children ran to her when they saw her, remembering how she had risked herself to pull them from the darkness of the canyon. But it was Pequeño Lobo, the 6-year-old she had rescued first, who became her constant shadow. His parents had died months earlier in a raid by Mexican soldiers, and since then he had lived under the tribe's protection, but without the warmth of a family to call his own. Something in Carmela's gentleness had touched the boy's wounded heart, and she responded with a maternal instinct she hadn't known she possessed. "Will you stay with us forever?" he asked one morning while she helped him braid cord for fishing nets. The question hit her like a blow to the stomach. Would she stay forever? She hadn't thought in terms of forever since arriving. She had been so focused on surviving each day that she hadn't allowed herself to imagine a future in this place. "I don't know, little one," she answered honestly, brushing his dark hair back from his forehead. Would you like me to stay? Yes, he said without hesitation. Takakota wants you to stay too. I see it in his eyes when he looks at you. The boy's words made her smile. Children had a way of seeing truths adults tried hard to conceal. And it was true. Something had changed in the way Takakota looked at her. It was no longer the cold evaluation of a warrior measuring a threat. Now there was curiosity, respect, and something deeper, something neither of them dared name. That very afternoon, as Carmela helped Aisha prepare medicines with desert herbs, a young warrior came running with alarming news. A Mexican settler family had camped near the sacred spring, the place where the Apaches held ancestral ceremonies, and where outsiders were strictly forbidden. They're sick, the young man reported, panting from his run. A woman, her husband, and 2 small children. They seem to have the fever that kills, but they're too weak to move. Nalnish immediately summoned a war council. The presence of Mexicans on sacred ground was a violation that usually demanded death, but attacking a sick family might invite retaliation from the army and put the entire village at risk. We must drive them out before they contaminate the sacred water, declared a young warrior whose father had been killed by Mexican soldiers. If they're as ill as Swifthawk says, another argued, they'll die on the trail. Their deaths on sacred land would defile it worse than their living presence. Takakota remained silent during the debate, but when all voices had quieted, he stood. I know this illness, he said gravely. My younger sister died of it 3 winters ago. If it is the fever, they'll soon be too weak to pose a threat, but also too weak to leave. That was when Carmela, who had been listening from the edge of the circle where women were allowed to observe but not speak, did something that stunned everyone. She stepped forward and addressed the council directly. I can help them, she declared with a firm voice that cut through the tension. I've seen this illness many times on my father's ranch. I know how to make the medicine that can save them. If we heal them, they can leave of their own will, without defiling the sacred land in death. The silence that followed was so deep, the wind could be heard whispering between the tents. A Mexican woman offering to save other Mexicans could be seen as betrayal to her new tribe, or it could be the perfect solution to a conflict with no clean answer. What if they try to harm you? Naalnish asked, studying her determined face. If they recognize you as the daughter of a landowner and try to take you with them, then they'll show they never deserved my help, she replied calmly. But if they're truly dying, they won't have the strength to do anything but accept the relief we offer. Takakota stood slowly. I'll go with her, he announced, and his declaration added new weight to the discussion. If anything goes wrong, I'll protect her. If the medicine works, I'll witness that she chose to save Mexican lives to protect Apache land. 2 hours later, Carmela and Takakota were riding toward the sacred spring, saddlebags loaded with herbs she had prepared under Aisha's guidance. Their journey was quiet, but not like before. No longer a silence of tension between strangers. Now it was the focused silence of 2 people bound by a common purpose. Takakota stood slowly. I'll go with her, he announced, and his declaration added a new dimension to the discussion. If anything goes wrong, I'll be there to protect her. If the medicine works, I'll be the witness that she chose to save Mexican lives to protect Apache land. 2 hours later, Carmela and Takakota rode toward the sacred spring, carrying saddlebags filled with medicinal herbs she had prepared under Aisha's careful guidance. The journey was made in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. No longer the tense quiet of 2 strangers forced to coexist. It was the shared concentration of 2 people united by a common mission. When they reached the spring, the scene was just as the young warrior had described. A settler family had set up a makeshift camp near the clear water, though it was obvious they had not chosen the site out of disrespect, but desperation. The man lay unconscious under a ragged blanket, while the woman, pale and feverish, tried to give water to two shivering children. "Who's there?" the woman croaked when she saw the riders approach. Her hand reached instinctively for an old rifle at her side, but she was too weak to lift it. "We've come to help," Carmela said in Spanish, dismounting slowly to avoid frightening the sick family. "I'm a healer. I can prepare medicine for the fever." The woman stared at her through fever-glazed eyes. "Are you Mexican?" she asked in disbelief. "What are you doing with an Apache?" "It's a long story," Carmela replied gently, approaching with calm, non-threatening gestures. "What matters now is that your children need help, and I know how to give it." For hours, Carmela worked without rest, brewing infusions of willow bark to lower fevers, applying herbal poultices to infected wounds, preparing a nutrient-rich broth from desert roots to strengthen their frail bodies. Takakota helped silently, holding bowls, feeding the fire, keeping watch on the surrounding terrain. "Why are you helping us?" the woman whispered when she had regained enough strength to sit upright. "We're strangers to you, and your companion is Apache. You should want us dead." Carmela paused her grinding of herbs and looked the woman in the eye. "Because there are moments in life when we must choose between hatred and compassion," she said simply. "I choose compassion." Takakota, who had been listening in silence, felt something shift deep inside his chest. In those words, he recognized the heart of the woman he had come to admire, someone capable of transcending the artificial lines between people to simply see human suffering and offer relief. By the second evening, the family had gained enough strength to travel. The father could stand without help. The children played around the camp, and the woman's cheeks had regained a healthy flush. Before they departed, they approached Carmela with tearful eyes. "We have nothing of value to offer you," the man said, voice trembling. "But we will never forget that a woman of great heart saved our lives when we were lost." "Your recovery is the only payment I need," Carmela replied. "Travel safely and stay away from lands that are not yours." As the family disappeared on the horizon, Carmela and Takakota remained alone beside the sacred spring. Stars began to bloom in the purple sky, and the clear water reflected the silver light of the crescent moon. "Why did you really do it?" Takakota asked, sitting beside her on a smooth rock by the water's edge. "It wasn't just compassion. There was something more." Carmela gazed up at the stars for a long moment before answering. "Because I wanted to prove that I can protect this place just as much as any warrior born here," she admitted. "Saving that family and getting them to leave of their own will protected the sanctity of this spring more effectively than killing them ever could." Takakota nodded slowly. "You understand more about being Apache than many who were born to it," he murmured. "Being a warrior doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means finding paths that avoid unnecessary battles." His words settled between them in a quiet that was no longer awkward, but comfortable, the kind of quiet that exists only between people who understand each other deeply. Then Takakota said something he had kept to himself since the day of his capture. "My real name isn't Takakota," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper in the night. "It's Itzel. It means star of the night in my grandmother's tongue. Takakota is the name I use with Mexicans because it's easier for them to pronounce. But you deserve to know my true name." Carmela felt as if he had handed her a precious gift. In indigenous cultures, sharing one's true name was a profound act of trust, an invitation to see a person's soul. "Itzel," she repeated softly, tasting the syllables like poetry. "It's beautiful. It means that every night when I look at the stars, I'll be thinking of your real name." He turned to her then, and for the first time since they met, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart tremble. It wasn't just respect or camaraderie, It was the glow of a man beginning to see a woman not as a burden he had been forced to carry, but as a companion his heart had chosen. Carmela, he whispered her name like a prayer. Do you know what your name means? My mother once told me it means Garden of God, she answered, surprised by the question. Then your name is perfect, he said, smiling, a real smile that transformed his entire face, because you've turned this barren place into a garden where beautiful things can grow. When they returned to the village that night, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer Takakota and Carmela, the captured warrior and the traded daughter. They were Itzel and Carmela, two souls who had begun to recognize each other as equals, as allies, and maybe even as something much more. 3 months had passed since the night at the sacred spring, and Carmela's life in Apache territory had settled into a rhythm she had never known before. Her relationship with Itzel had blossomed like a desert flower. They slept in the same tent, though on separate bedding in respect of tradition. But between them had grown a bond that transcended the physical. The season of ceremonies is coming soon, Itzel had told her one morning. It's when our people celebrate sacred unions. Nalnish asked if I would be requesting permission to... He trailed off, but his eyes finished the sentence. You're asking if I want to be your wife, according to your people's traditions? Carmela whispered, scarcely able to believe the words. I'm asking if you want to build a life with me, a life we choose, not one imposed by others, he said, taking her hands in his. I'm asking if we should decide our destiny together. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want to choose a life with you. But destiny had other plans. That same afternoon, Pequeño Lobo came running with terror in his eyes. Carmela! Mexican soldiers! He shouted, pointing toward the horizon, where a cloud of dust approached. Lots of soldiers with flags. When the riders came into view, what Carmela saw hit her like a lightning bolt. At the front rode her brother Evaristo, clad in a captain's uniform. Beside him was Don Bautista, her father. 30 soldiers rode behind them, forming an intimidating presence. Carmela! Don Bautista shouted when he saw her. My daughter, we've come to bring you home. Home, the word that had once meant safety, now sounded like a prison. Itzel appeared at her side instantly. You don't have to go with them, he murmured. You are free to choose your own path. Don Bautista approached with firm steps. The months had transformed Carmela. Her skin was sun-bronzed, her body strong, and her eyes shone with confidence. Look what you've become, he muttered. Dressed like a savage, living in primitive conditions, forgetting everything we taught you. I've become someone useful, Carmela replied with quiet resolve. Someone who can save lives and choose her own destiny. Isn't that what you wanted? Evaristo stepped forward. You've been with these savages too long. You're not thinking clearly. It's time to return to civilization. Civilization? Carmela asked, raising an eyebrow. You mean the place where I was always seen as useless? Here, I've found a civilization that values my heart, not just my name. Don Bautista exchanged a glance with Evaristo. They had expected to find a broken daughter, not a woman defending her new life with passion. We've come to offer redemption, Don Bautista announced. Don Aurelio Mendoza's son wants to marry you, a respectable man willing to overlook your time with the Apaches. I don't need anyone's redemption, Carmela stated, and I don't want a man who sees me as a favor to be tolerated. I've found someone who loves me for who I really am. Don Bautista turned to Itzel, who had remained silent but alert. This is the Apache who's filled your head with romantic ideas? He asked, his tone filled with disdain. You think you can have a real life with a prisoner of war? Itzel stepped forward with natural dignity. Don Bautista, he said in flawless Spanish. My name is Itzel, and I am no one's prisoner. Your daughter stayed here of her own free will, and I chose to love her of my own free will. If she chooses to go, I will let her go, with my blessing. If she chooses to stay, I will protect her with my life." His words were spoken with such dignity that even Evaristo seemed momentarily shaken. "Carmela," Don Bautista said, shifting tactics, "think of your mother. Doña Amparo cries every night since you left. Think of the pain you've caused her." The mention of her mother struck deep. "How is mother really?" Carmela asked, her voice tightening. "She's sick with sorrow," Evaristo replied. "Doctors say her heart weakens from the grief of losing you. She might not survive unless her daughter returns." The words were knives in Carmela's soul. Despite everything, Doña Amparo had always given her unconditional love. Itzel, seeing the pain in her face, made a decision that would show the depth of his love. "Carmela," he said softly, "if you need to go see your mother, I will wait for you, no matter how long it takes." His words finally shattered Carmela's defenses. Tears streamed down her face as she wrestled with the most painful decision of her life. "I need time to think," she murmured. "I can't decide now." Nalnish stepped forward. "We invite you to stay the night in our village," he said to Don Bautista and Evaristo. "You may see how your daughter lives here. Tomorrow morning, she will decide with a clear mind." That night was tense. Carmela sat between two worlds, her family on one side, Itzel and Pequeño Lobo on the other. During dinner, she watched her father and brother observe Apache life, searching for evidence to confirm their biases, but they also saw the unexpected. They saw Pequeño Lobo curl against Carmela with absolute trust. They saw the women treat her like a beloved sister. They saw the way Itzel looked at her with open, unashamed love. "That boy," Don Bautista began. "He's my adopted son," Carmela said proudly. "His parents were killed, and I chose to care for him. He chose to love me as his mother." Don Bautista studied the interaction. The bond between them was undeniable, something he himself had failed to create with his own daughter. Later that night, Carmela sat alone beneath the stars. Itzel approached quietly. "What will you decide?" he asked softly. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice thick with anguish. "I love the life we've built here. I love you. I love Pequeño Lobo. I love the woman I've become. But I also love my mother. And the thought that she's dying because of me, it destroys me." Itzel took her hands in his. "Then go with them," he said, with a generosity that broke her heart. "Go care for your mother. I'll wait here until you can come back. And if I can't come back, if they don't let me, then I'll have had the blessing of loving you for these perfect months," he said, his voice catching. "And that's more true love than most people experience in a lifetime." His words were the final drop. Carmela collapsed into his arms, sobbing. At dawn, as Don Bautista prepared to depart, Carmela emerged from her tent with calm determination. "I'll go with you," she announced, "but only to see my mother. I'm not accepting any marriage proposals. I will return as soon as I know she's well." Don Bautista protested, but Carmela stood her ground. "This is my final decision. Either you accept my terms, or I stay here forever." An hour later, as she rode away with the soldiers, Carmela turned to look back, seeing Itzel and Pequeño Lobo watching her departure with broken hearts. But with complete understanding, she didn't know that it would be months before she saw them again, and that doing the right thing for her mother would lead her to face the hardest test of her life. The return to the San Cristobal ranch felt like stepping back into a life that no longer belonged to her. Carmela found her mother, Doña Amparo, in a pitiful state, pale and thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hopeless days. But when she saw her daughter enter through the front door, her eyes lit up like she had witnessed a miracle. "My daughter!" she cried, clinging to Carmela with desperate strength. "I thought I would never see you again." "I thought you had died in that savage land." In the weeks that followed, Carmela dedicated herself completely to her mother's care, preparing nourishing meals, accompanying her on slow walks through the garden, and spending hours telling carefully edited stories of her time among the Apaches. Little by little, color returned to Doña Amparo's cheeks and light to her eyes. But as her mother's health improved, the pressure from her family mounted. Don Bautista began inviting Aurelio Mendoza Jr. to dinner frequently, a man in his 30s whose main virtue seemed to be his willingness to overlook Carmela's past with the Apache. Every conversation felt like a negotiation, with her being the product to be sold. "Carmela," Aurelio said one afternoon while they walked through the garden under Don Bautista's watchful eye, "I understand you've been through difficult experiences, but I'm willing to offer you a new chance to be a respectable wife. We could have a good life together." His words, though polite, rang hollow compared to Itzel's passionate declarations. "Señor Mendoza," Carmela replied with cold courtesy, "I appreciate your offer, but my heart belongs to someone else." "You mean the savage Apache?" he asked with barely veiled disdain. "Carmela, that wasn't real love. It was survival under extreme circumstances. Here you can have true, civilized love." That was the final straw. "You know nothing about true love," she replied firmly, her voice sharper than he expected. "Real love doesn't judge the past, doesn't offer itself as forgiveness, and certainly doesn't act like a favor for who I am." That night, Don Bautista stormed into her room with a grim expression. "Your behavior is unacceptable," he said. "Aurelio is a good man from a respectable family. You can't keep clinging to fantasies of life with savages." "They're not fantasies, father," Carmela said, standing tall with the dignity she had learned in Apache territory. "It's the most real life I've ever known. And if you force me to marry someone I don't love, you'll be killing the daughter you fought so hard to bring back." The tension reached its peak when Don Bautista announced that the wedding date had been set for the following week, with or without her consent. "It's for your own good," he declared. "In time, you'll thank me." But Doña Amparo, who had silently endured the daily arguments with growing unease, finally stepped in. One night, she entered her daughter's room quietly and sat on the edge of the bed. "My dear," she began softly, "I've been watching you since you returned. There's a light in your eyes when you speak of your life with the Apaches, a strength in your voice and certainty in your steps I never saw when you lived here." Tears welled in Carmela's eyes. "Mother, I found true love. I found purpose. I found a version of myself that is worth loving." Doña Amparo took her daughter's hands in hers. "Then go," she whispered. "Go find your happiness before it's too late. I'll be fine. Knowing you're happy will bring me more health than keeping you here, miserable forever." At dawn the next day, before anyone else in the house had awakened, Carmela left on her favorite mare, carrying only essentials and a farewell letter for her family. Her mother had helped her escape, giving her money and provisions for the journey. The ride back to Apache territory took 4 days of intense travel. Her heart beat with both hope and terror. What if Itzel had stopped waiting? What if he had found someone else? What if the tribe no longer wanted her back? When she finally spotted the familiar tents on the horizon, her heart nearly stopped. The village was still there, but smaller. Fewer tents. As she got closer, she realized why. Many families had left, likely in search of safer ground. She dismounted with trembling legs and walked toward the village center. The few people she passed recognized her immediately, but their expressions were cautious. Finally, Aisha approached her. "Carmela," she said, clearly surprised. "Have you come back to stay, or just to visit?" "I've come back to stay," Carmela said firmly. "Where is Itzel? Where is Pequeño Lobo?" Aisha pointed toward a solitary tent at the edge of the circle. "Itzel is there. But you should know, it's been a hard time for him. Many believed you'd never return, but he insisted on waiting. Pequeño Lobo waited too, until 2 weeks ago, when he fell seriously ill. Itzel hasn't left his side." Carmela's heart pounded as she ran toward the tent. Lifting the leather flap, she found a scene that shattered her. Itzel sat beside a small bedding mat, where Pequeño Lobo lay pale and struggling to breathe. The warrior looked gaunt, like he hadn't eaten or slept properly in weeks. "Itzel," she whispered. He turned slowly, as if afraid he were hallucinating. When their eyes met, tears welled in those dark eyes she loved so dearly. "Carmela," he whispered her name like a prayer. "You're really here?" "I'm here to stay," she replied, running to him. "I'm here forever." They embraced with the desperation of months apart, of countless nights spent dreaming of this very moment. But their reunion was interrupted by a weak cough from the bed. "Carmela," Pequeño Lobo murmured, barely audible. "My mother came back." Carmela knelt beside the boy, taking his small hand in hers. "Yes, my little warrior," she whispered. "Your mother came back, and she's never leaving again." In the days that followed, Carmela poured everything she knew into caring for Pequeño Lobo. Drawing from both her grandmother's teachings and the wisdom of the Apache women, she used every healing method she could. Gradually, the child began to recover, and with his strength returning, the village seemed to breathe new life too. One evening, as Pequeño Lobo slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Itzel led Carmela to the sacred spring where they had shared their first moment of intimacy. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he confessed under the stars, which shimmered like diamonds above them. "Every day without word from you felt like dying a little more." "You never lost me," she said, cupping his face in her hands. "My heart never left this place. I just had to make sure my mother was safe. But I always knew I'd come back to you." Itzel pulled something from his robe, a necklace of turquoise and silver beads he had crafted during her absence. "This is for our wedding ceremony," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "If you still want to marry me." "I want to marry you in every tradition that binds us," she replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Apache, Mexican, any custom that ties me closer to you." The ceremony took place a week later, under the full moon. The tribe gathered around the sacred circle to bless their union. Carmela wore a beautiful deerskin dress adorned with beads, and Itzel donned his ceremonial warrior garb. Pequeño Lobo, now fully recovered, served as ring-bearer with pride. Nilnish presided over the ritual, speaking of how true love can bloom even under the harshest conditions, how two hearts destined for each other will always find their way back. 5 years later, Carmela and Itzel had built a thriving community that bridged two worlds. Their home became a place where Mexican and Apache families lived in peace, where children played together regardless of skin color, and where love had proven stronger than any prejudice. Carmela, now the mother of 3 children of her own, alongside Pequeño Lobo, had become a healer respected throughout the region. Her story was told around fires as a legend of how true love can transform destinies and heal ancient wounds. One afternoon, as she watched her children play in the garden she had planted beside their home, Itzel came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Do you ever miss your old life?" he asked, as he had so many times before. "How could I miss a life where I was never truly happy?" she replied, leaning into his strong chest. "Here I have everything I ever dreamed of, without knowing I was dreaming." As the sun set, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Carmela knew she had chosen well. True love had triumphed over every obstacle, and her story had become a legend of hope for all the women who once believed their happiness depended on someone else's decision. She had learned that true love doesn't just change lives, it creates entirely new worlds where anything is possible.